In this lesson, I'm going to cover off some of the core fundamental principles within JavaScript and working with variables. So if I set a variable of x, and then over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to output that variable of x. So I'm going to just output it within the inner HTML. So notice that we haven't actually set any kind of value for x, but we have declared x. So when we refresh it, we see that we get, by default, we get this value of undefined. So essentially what that means is that variables have two states. So once you declare a variable, and if you haven't declared any value to contain within the variable, it's going to come up undefined. But if you've already defined some value within it, then it's just going to simply be defined. And it is important to understand because there is a difference then if I just simply remove out x, and if I refresh it, then we see nothing happens. But when I open up my console, I'm going to see a console error there because we haven't actually referenced x. So x is not defined. So there is a difference when we're doing undefined, when we declare it and we get the output of undefined, but we haven't even declared x. So that means that we get a console error and the JavaScript will break at that point. So another error that you might see when you're working with JavaScript is if we're using a value, and I'm going to set something in here of a value of 1. So x is now going to equal 1. So we save that, it outputs 1, everything's good. But what if we actually want to output a number and we want to use x maybe as a number, and but we set it as a string value? And then I try to use x as a number. So let's try to divide it by 12 and see what happens. So we see we get this NaN. So this, essentially what this means is not a number. So this error, or this value that will show up in place of the returned value when you try to use a string as a number. So obviously you can't divide the string by 12, and that's where you get this NaN error. And one more example. So I'm going to set a variable y, and I'm going to give it a value of 5. So what do you think is going to happen if I do x plus y? So do you think we're going to return an NaN, or do you think we're going to get 1, 5? We're going to throw some other type of error. What do you think is going to happen here? So we've clearly got a string value and a number there. And if you said that we're going to get 1 and 5, then you're correct. So what happens here is this now gets treated as a string, and we can no longer treat it as a number because now it's been converted to a string, because when you try to add a string to any other type, then it automatically becomes a string. As opposed to if I do 6 plus 5, then we actually get 11. And then of course we can add some other operators, so I can do divided by 12 or something like that. And the interesting thing here is what happens. It actually does that division, so it recognizes y as a number and it performs that mathematical calculation, and then it actually concatenates it into the 1 and creates a string. But if we were to bracket this off, show you what happens now. So what do you think is going to happen now? We're actually got a string plus a number, so we're adding them together, and then we're doing a division by 12. And when we do that, we get not a number because we're not able to divide this by 12 anymore, because this is no longer a number. Once we've brought those together and essentially created a string, we can no longer add that together or do any kind of mathematical calculations. And something else that we've been looking at before as well, so we do have the ability to add several strings together, and all that is we can just use the plus sign. I'm going to get rid of this division by 12. So if we can add x plus a, and that's going to give us a value of both of those strings combined, and again the end result is going to be another string. So in the next lesson, we're going to look at operators in JavaScript and how to use them within your source code. So that's coming up in the next lesson.